introduce myself when I put the slides on, but before I do that, before I put the slides on, just keen to position the talk this way. I've done this talk before, I've updated it a little bit, but I offered to do it again because of the recent events with Code Clan. So I'm actually quite keen to know if any of the attendees are either a current cohort Code Clan or a Code Clan alumni. If you wouldn't mind just putting that information in the chat, that would be interesting to know. I think with the way that the Code Clan going into administration has been sorted out so quickly, I think there may be a meeting on right now to relaunch the courses. So that may be why certain people aren't able to attend. So thanks for that, Sarah. I see you're a Code Clan alumni. That's great. And
so that's actually something that I was looking at. Was Code Clan just before I went on vacation and then came back to the news that
yeah you probably timed your holiday well. Okay. And one other question, this will seem a bit random before we start, but the reason for this question will become obvious. If anybody on the call is a mortgage, has a mortgage on their flat, apartment, house, whatever, could you just let me know or let Charlotte know so Wenjing does? Okay, that's great. Right, and Brian does as well. Right, without further ado, I'll try and share my screen, which is always the dicey bit of the process. And Charlotte, I struggle to keep up with chat when I'm on presenting, so keep me straight if there's anything that I need to react to. So can everybody see that? Yep, great. So, landing your next role, routes to market, that's what we'll be talking about for the next 50 minutes or so. And was that advanced? Thumbs up, Charlotte. Are we on an agenda slide now? Yeah, great. So this is what we'll be going through. Who is this guy? Some opening thoughts. 5 of what I see as the key routes to market in terms of securing your next role. Then some summary and next steps. And as I say, there will be some bits of it that are somewhat interactive. Also keen to take questions as we go or at the end. But on the right there, I'm quite deliberately not doing those things, partly because of time, but partly because I think when you get into CVs and interview techniques and what have you, that becomes quite specific to the person, the volunteer, and what they're hoping to do next. And I don't think that's quite so appropriate for this sort of open forum. But what I would say is, Charlotte, Joe, I'm pretty sure you're always very receptive to hearing from the volunteers on what type of talks they'd like to have. So, if you want talks on those sort of subjects, then just let Charlotte or Joe know. Yep. So, who is he? This weird bloke on the screen. So a pretty varied career. I started out in retail as a buying manager. I was 13 years there, longest I've been anywhere. But one of those years I was actually seconded into an IT role to set up a service. So that was kind of like my first sniff of IT. I then moved properly into IT services, and I've had 4 sort of employed permie roles, 3 in IT, 1 in telco. Then I went self-employed. I've done 8 contracts as a PM for hire, and I now work part-time on a portfolio basis. So in other words, I'm pretty old. So what's the relevance of that? First thing to say is, in terms of job seeking, I've done both a sprint and a marathon. And what I mean by that is a sprint, I guess that's happy path. I think the quickest I've ever done it is deciding that I was ready to roll and looking to get my next contract, and I moved from start to finish being an offer in 4 days. So I was pretty chuffed with that. A marathon, on the other hand, it once took me 14 months. That was when I was in the sort of employed world. And 14 months looking is a long slog. It's not a lot of fun. I was married, 2 boys at the time. Well, I'm still married with the same 2 boys. But so sprint and marathon, I've done them both. I've had some redundancies, and I guess I've learned how to bounce back from those. I've done both outplacement and careers counselling. Outplacement, if anybody doesn't know the term, is if a company is laying off people, normally multiple people, they might give them credits to an outplacement consultancy to give them assistance with whatever they need assistance with. So I've done some of that. And I also once reached into my own wallet and paid for some careers counselling. So some of the things I've kind of like learned through those processes are things that I know about and are in this presentation. And then the last thing is, you know, having been around the industry for quite a long time, I've seen the whole recruitment process change out of all recognition. Some people call it the RTech revolution. So when I started out, it was all paper-based. A lot of it was in the newspapers, so you had to buy the newspaper on the correct day of the week. You had to get your scissors, snip out the ad, then write a letter, send your CV. Really cumbersome, and the whole thing took ages from start to finish. You know, not unusual for the whole process to take 2 or 3 months, and you know, very, very different to that now. So that's a bit about me and kind of like why why I know a bit about this sort of subject. So a few random thoughts and pictures just to get us started. I think big statement at the top. You know, everyone on this call, you are the sales and marketing director of your own career. Yeah, down to you. Nobody else can do it for you. Might be a scary thought, or it might be quite a liberating thought, but I think it's the right way to think about it. And a few pictures there, some sort of points of reference. Something that I really like around this time of year is No Wrong Path, which is mainly an initiative around school leavers, people waiting for their exam results. And it features people, you know, further on in their careers, some very, very senior people, and they just open up with a blog article or a short video on how they got from where they started to where they are now. No wrong path. Or another way of thinking about that is it can be quite a windy road. There are some dead ends, but you know, you look at somebody in a big role, managing director or whatever, and you think, oh wow, you know, they've, you know, you can kind of envisage how they got there. But in this No Wrong Path, you realize people go all sorts of strange routes to land up where they are. And the thinker, top right, a few words in those graphics just to focus minds. And up in the top left, I just found that on the web. That's a picture of an Olivetti 286 PC, which was the first work PC I ever had in about 1991. It was slow as a dog, used floppy disks, and that was the first thing I used. So I should think your biro has more computing power than that thing did, but you know, that's how the industry moves. Right, I'm just going to rattle on, and unless anybody shouts, or Charlotte, unless there's any questions you want me to field as we go. So, you know, we all work in technical roles, or aspire to work in technical roles, or interested in technology. So we're probably all quite interested in data and numbers. So I thought we'd start there on routes to market. 2 different graphs, 2 different pie charts. And they show some quite startling information that you may or may not relate to. You may have a view that job boards are the biggest route to market. Well, news for you, they're not. You may think networking is a bit of an esoteric subject and quite perhaps one of the smaller ones, and actually it isn't. It's one of the bigger routes to market. So the chart on the left is just something randomly I found on the web. The one on the right is something that I got maybe 15 years ago through an outplacement consultancy. To be honest, it doesn't really matter what the relevant percentages are of these pie charts. The important thing is there are multiple routes to market. And if you don't try and cover them all, you are absolutely reducing your chances of landing your ideal role or landing it quickly. If you're only focusing on advertised roles or agencies, you are only addressing a small part of the market. So that's kind of the big message around this presentation and what follows. So I'm going to start with networking, partly because I believe it's the biggest or one of the biggest, but also it's a topic that some people struggle with. So we'll go on to that in a minute. Just on these pie charts, I think the other point to mention is these routes to market, they're not mutually exclusive. Even in one opportunity, you can employ various different of these routes and techniques to increase your chances. Yeah. So on to networking. So routes to market, networking. And who was the individual who has a mortgage who would like to help me with a little bit of role play? Brian, could I pick on you? Yeah.
You
okay.
Absolutely can. I'm sorry for the weird angle.
That's
my
okay.
laptop screen has cracked, and
that's quite all right. That's quite all right. So this is super scary, completely unscripted. Brian, you had no knowledge that I was going to pick on you, did you?
No.
You have no idea what's about to happen. Okay.
I would have got better dressed if I knew.
So this is a practical example of networking. We'll only spend about a minute on it, but then we'll spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about it. So I need a plumber, okay? I've got a flood, as you can see. And I choose to go the route of asking somebody that I know, in this case, Brian, he's got a recommendation. So Brian, I'm phoning you up now. Hi, Brian, we've not spoken for a while. I've got a problem. I'd really appreciate your advice. I need a good plumber, Is there any chance that you've got a plumber that you've used recently that you could recommend?
Yes, I do. I have a guy who I went to school with who has his own company, and he's done some work for my parents.
Fantastic.
And
he's a good guy. He punctual, didn't leave a mess. Yeah, fixed their problems.
Cleaned up after himself, fixed the problems. Mum and dad, very hard to please. Well,
yeah.
So he's done a fantastic job. And they've used him. He has now became, he's now became my dad's default plumber, if you like, right?
Fantastic. So Brian, that's terrific. Is there any chance you could just forward me his contact details and maybe let me know what his name is?
Absolutely. His name is Mark McDade, and his company is called Brody Plumbers, which is after his son called Brody.
Excellent. So many thanks, Brian. Lovely to have a chat. I'll hang up the call now. Look forward to hearing and getting the details about Mark. Okay.
All right.
So that's the role play over. Networking at its fundamental level is as basic as that. So if you're looking for a good tradesman, you'd probably quite naturally, instinctively think about asking a pal or a neighbor or one of your relatives, because that personal recommendation, in this case for Mark the plumber, is going to be very, very useful. Now, if we just kind of like break this down a bit further, so there's three parties here. There's myself, there's Brian, and there's Mark. And you could kind of think in some ways we've all benefited from this bit of networking in this call. So I've benefited because I've got a recommendation, yeah, and I can now phone up Mark and say, you work for Brian and Brian's parents. Brian tells me you're a super good guy. Any chance you can come round quickly? Brian benefits, I hope, because it's always nice to have somebody seek your advice and be able to help somebody out, yeah? So hopefully Brian's got a nice warm feeling about that. Now, Mark potentially benefits because he thinks, okay, so this guy, Andrew, who I've never ever heard of, but he knows Brian and Brian's parents, and they're a good client. So maybe Andrew will be a good client as well. So I'll make sure I get back in touch with him, or I give him a quick quote. So that's networking. There can be a lot more to it than that, but that at its most simple is networking. I go on in each of these sections to hints and tips, so we'll come back to that in a minute. But the next thing that I wanted to do is the piece of paper and pen exercise. So I really, really strongly recommend that everybody who's looking at, moving on or securing their first role or their next role or career changing, thinks about networking in the way that I'm about to outline. So the starting point is on the blank piece of paper exercise, is to get that blank piece of paper and your pen, and right in the middle of the paper, put a dot. Or if you're really adventurous, draw a little stick person, okay? Right in the middle of the piece of paper. And that represents you, okay? What you should then do, actually, I'll go back a slide. What you should then do is make a list of everybody that you know who you think you might just be able to have a conversation with, a networking conversation with, that you're comfortable to have, and somebody that you think just might be able to help you, either with some information or some advice, okay? So that's understanding your network. That list would be understanding your network. Those might be friends, relatives, neighbors, people in the STA, current colleagues, former colleagues, somebody you used to work for, anybody you think, right, I'd be okay having a conversation with them. I wouldn't find it embarrassing or awkward, and they just might be able to help me. So that basically then is that blue circle in the middle. That's everybody that you know that you'd be potentially thinking about having that conversation with. Outside that, the next ring is all the people that they know, your first line of connections know, but you don't know them. Beyond that is the next ring and the next ring. So what you're trying to do here is expand your network by utilizing your network. So you move from your stick person in the middle and all those people that you know, have some initial conversations, and they may just say, okay, I didn't know that you were looking for a plumber. I'll introduce you to Mark, who in the Brian example would be sitting in that ring 2. Or, okay, I now understand that you're looking for a role in software development. Now, I happen to know somebody who has their own software company, or who works for IBM, or whatever the heck it is. So you then get a recommendation from the person in that first circle to the person in the second circle. And that makes it a bit more of an open door for you to then contact that person. And you then expand your network and you can move out through the rings. Now, this might seem a bit strange and sort of esoteric, and it does take a bit of practice, and we'll come on to some hints and tips in a minute. A couple of points I'd want to make. One is I've personally had a lot of assistance from people who are sort of in that fourth outer ring. It took me 3 hops to get there, maybe more. And the point there is, if you approach people in the right way, and if you have a referral to go to them, people generally are open to providing assistance. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is, whilst this maybe gets easier with practice, don't think it's only available and useful as a technique for people who've progressed through their careers. My son graduated about 8 years ago from Strathclyde Uni with a degree in chemistry. Wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do next. He got his first role by networking, in quite a random way. So it's applicable to everybody. So I'm just going to do this one, and then I'll pause perhaps for some questions or some discussion on networking. So hints and tips, and this will then conclude the first of the routes to market. You need to be brave, yeah? For some people, personality types, whatever, or if you've never thought about asking people for advice in this way before, it can be a bit scary. Be brave. Start safe and practice, yeah? Start with somebody where there's absolutely no risk of you being feeling in an uncomfortable position. Approach it in a professional and business-like way, yeah? Prepare for each and every meeting, yeah? So I wouldn't have phoned up Brian and just randomly chatted without getting to the point quite quickly that why I was phoning him was I was seeking some advice for a plumber. Enjoy it if you can. I do. Out of practice is refining your approach and your technique. I think number 7 is really, really important. Write back to people. So somebody's committed some of their time to have a coffee with you or catch up with you by phone or what have you. Maybe somebody you know, but it may be somebody that you were introduced to. So write back to them. Gives you an opportunity to maybe lengthen the conversation, maybe have a follow-up conversation with them. Really pays dividends to be organized and keep records. Who did you speak to, when, what advice did they give you, what referrals did they make, and have you then followed up on those referrals? And then, help others where you can, because it's a networking merry-go-round. Brian's helped me, I'll help Brian with something, or I'll help somebody else. And then we've got the guy up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, Mark Beaumont, the man who cycled the world. And the reason I've put that up is I think it's just about the best short piece on networking I've ever written. I've ever read. I haven't written anything I've ever read. So Mark Beaumont, for those of you who don't know, he was a graduate from, I think he did economics at Glasgow. And he had this crazy notion that when he graduated, he was not only going to cycle around the world, but he was going to beat the world record, and he wanted to make a documentary. So, from somebody totally unknown, that was quite an ambitious challenge he set himself. And he started off by writing to all sorts of different companies and organizations asking for sponsorship. And he got, I think 4 or 5 months in, he got nothing apart from very, very frustrated. Most people didn't even reply. So he spoke to, I think it was his cousin, and said, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do here. At this rate, I'll never get to fulfill my dream and try and break the record. And the cousin said, well, change your approach. Why don't you ask people in your network for advice and maybe for referrals? See if they know of anybody who could help you. And he said, well, I don't have a network. I don't really know anybody like that. And she said, well, just start with who you do know. And true story, within 2 weeks, he got all his sponsorship, he got the BBC on board, and he was ready to go. So it is powerful, and it's really, really worth perhaps challenging yourself and making it part of your next job search. So I'm going to pause now. We're half an hour in already, and we've only done one of the routes to market. If anybody wants to ask a question on networking or what have you, then take yourself on mute or put something in the chat and go for
it. I've got a question. What I've seen, for a number of years now, is large networking events.
Yeah.
I myself haven't been to any. It's just, I guess, an open question. Has anyone been to a networking event, and how have you found it? Has it been?
I have. But I'm probably not the best person to answer that. Anybody else been to one? Well, I think I maybe don't differentiate between a networking event and just, for instance, a tech meetup or any meeting with a group of people, some of whom you know, some of whom you don't know. You can use any form of group meeting to do some networking, and some people say it's there's a sort of a speed dating or a speed networking analogy, which might be a bit glib, but it's be brave, it's start safe and practice. Introduce yourself in a very short, concise way. Tell people who you are, what you're currently doing, what you might be wanting to do next, and see where the conversation goes. It may be a lower success rate than on the sort of plumbing example and the concentric circles process that I went through, but you can get some really good contacts and some really good information at those events.
Thank you.
Right, unless there's anything else, I'm going to move on to the next one.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
I was wondering if this also does this also count as a networking?
This meeting right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does.
Right.
So
okay.
You can come back to myself, to Joe, to anybody on the call afterwards, if you wish, with a request for a follow-up.
All right, brilliant. Yeah. Thank you.
And I'd be delighted to follow up with anybody who wishes to after this. I've got my contact details right at the end.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, job boards. So question, how many people find their next job by searching on the internet and job boards? Anyone got a figure in mind? Shout it out or put it in the chat.
20% possibly,
20?
quite low.
Yeah. It might be around there. To be honest, I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody does. But the point is, it's not as high as you think it is. Not as high as everyone thinks it is. So if you're only focusing on job boards, you're only addressing one part of the market. And there's some other downsides to job boards as well, which we'll come on to in a minute. So the next question that people often ask is, which ones are the best? Which job boards are the best? How do you think you might figure that out for yourself? Suggestion, you could ask people in your network. If you're a Code Clanner or a Code Clan alumni, and you're aware of other alumni who have already progressed into their first role or subsequent roles, but contact them. Do you mind me asking how you got your current role, or how you got your first role after Code Clan? Oh, I got it via a job board. Did you? How interesting. Which job board was it? Bang, 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 off you go. So job boards serve all sorts of different purposes, all sorts of different industries. Some are better than others for different people at different stages. There's no one right answer to that question, but you can kind of use your network to try and find out. And you can also have a think about these hints and tips. So you need to be really organized and time efficient with job boards. Otherwise, they will consume all your time and energy and leave you feeling grim. So if you think about a job board back to you being the sales and marketing director of your own career, yeah? The thing about a job board is it's out there on the internet. Everybody can see it. So that job that's on there, even if it's a real job that exists that hasn't already been filled, you are one of 10, 100, 1,000 people who's going to apply. So you've already got quite a narrow chance of getting from the job board application to the first interview. Quite narrow. Much narrower than if you just happen to use, for instance, networking, and you manage to find and get a referral to a hiring manager who's just thinking about hiring somebody in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, that's, you might be one of one then, one of two, not one of 1,000. So you need to be really smart about how you use them. You can use alerts to help with that. And tune the alerts. Don't just have an alert and leave it untouched. You can have alerts on job boards. You can have them with recruitment agencies, with certain employers. So if the role on a job board is via a recruitment consultancy, a recruitment company, and we'll come on to them in a minute, rather than just applying for the role on the job board, if you can also get the contact details, track down the recruitment consultant, and try and have a conversation with them, then you will increase your chances. Because suddenly you're not one of 100 people that that recruitment consultant has to filter through and think, God, I've got 100. I can only see 10. But you've actually had a conversation with them, so you're more likely to be on that first 10. I think the fourth one's vital. What's your evaluation criteria? You need to be really selective, really ruthless. And if they meet your criteria, you might want to apply. If they don't, then you're just wasting your time. So if you were only interested in a job in, I don't know, in the central belt of Scotland, in software development, why apply for something that's in Manchester? Might be a very highly paid software development role. It might have a lot of other really good things about it. If it isn't in your target area, then you're just wasting your time. And talking of time, they always have a deadline, so you need to be time efficient. That means if you can spot something when it's just posted, they quite often have a posted on date. You'll have a better chance if you apply early than if you apply late. What I do, and I know a lot of other people do as well, is they just time manage. They time box part of each day, or maybe just a couple of times a week, to job boards, looking through their alerts, and then move on to other things. And that's similar to the last point. It can actually be really frustrating and quite stressful, feeling that you've got all these alerts, you've got hundreds of potential roles, and you haven't got time to apply for them all. Well, just be happy with the fact that you've reviewed the alerts, you've spotted 2 or 3 things that might be of interest, you've applied for them. That's great. Yeah, nobody can get through everything on this. Anything on job boards? Or shall I move on to the next one? I'll move on. LinkedIn. So I said at the start, I'm not going to do a deep dive into LinkedIn. It could easily take a very productive hour just on LinkedIn. I'm probably not the best person to do that. But what I would say is I'm a big fan of it. I think it's really useful as part of your job search, part of your career plan. I've had a profile for about 20 years. I also think it's a really good research tool. And one of the many things it does, if you've moved around a bit, you've moved from your first job where you knew 20 good people and you move on somewhere else, it makes it really easy to keep in touch with those 20 people, even if they've moved on to other companies or organizations. Whereas previously you had to try and keep their mobile numbers or keep a document of where everybody was. So some hints and tips there, work your profile. Don't just put it up there and leave it to go moldy. LinkedIn also is a job board, and it's probably one of the more useful ones. So you can set up some alerts there. If there's companies you're interested in, then just quickly click and follow them. That means you'll get in your feed all their news alerts and updates. You might want to think about posting some relevant and interesting items. This makes you a bit more visible. So does commenting on other people's posts. LinkedIn has a groups feature. If you go to the top right of the screen on the LinkedIn homepage, there's I think it's a 3x3 grid. And from there, you can get into groups and have a look at them. Might be worth joining one or two. You might get some interaction with some useful people. So if you're looking for a role in UI UX, there will be a UI UX group. Maybe look for one that's based in the UK, unless you're planning on working overseas, and see what's in there. People might post some interesting stuff. They might post something about come along to our UI UX meetup group in a week's time, and you think, oh right, I'll do that, and you might meet some really interesting people there. So kind of the last one's kind of dough. It's we're all probably reasonably adept at social media, and this is social media for business, so it's got to be a key part of your job search. So what do we think about that? What do we think about LinkedIn? People using it, people not using it? Yeah.
Yeah, I use it for a few hours a day to apply, much like you said, to research, to apply for jobs, to look up who works there, get an idea of the company before you apply, etc.
Absolutely.
So I find it really useful.
It's a key research tool without a doubt. Okay, so we've done 3. There's 2 to go, and then a bit of a roundup. So I'll motor on. Recruitment agencies, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's an old film, an old Western. Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood, and some other guy. So recruitment agencies can be a bit of an unknown quantity, a bit of a scary topic. A bit like job boards. How do I find the best one? Maybe ask around, ask in your network, ask in the STA. Straight on to hints and tips. So I think it's really important to be clear with recruitment agencies about what you're looking for and what good looks like to you. So the recruitment company may have just one consultant, it may have hundreds or thousands of consultants. It may specialize just in your sector, or it may cover lots and lots of sectors and industries. So what does good look like? Not just in terms of what they work on, but how they interact with you. That means have maybe some clear terms of reference. So that could be, you know, I'm looking to work with consultants who will meet with me before we go any further. That might be something that you're keen to do, or it might be a level of confidence that they will actually reply to phone calls and emails. That could be another key point to you. And what you're striving to is try and get some productive relationships with some named consultants. Okay, so I think the recruitment company itself is important, but probably more important is having a relationship with a named consultant. You know, somebody who you can get to know, they can get to know you, and you're then on their radar, you're then on their list. You know, next time they have a role in UX UI, they might just think of you, and they might, you know, contact you before it's even advertised. And some of these relationships can last years. You know, recruitment consultants tend to move around between organizations quite a lot. You formed a good relationship with them, keep in touch with them. Hopefully they'll keep in touch with you. I did a bit of research before updating these slides, and I believe there are 22,000 recruitment companies in the UK. That's the source of that information. So you've got to be selective, yeah? A bit like job boards, but perhaps even more so here. 22,000, that's a lot of organizations. You know, recruitment in the UK is a massive industry. Really big one, number 5, it's, you know, you never part company with your money. The employer pays the agency, you never do. There's different ways that employer agency relationship can work, but, you know, written in tablets of stone, you never ever part money to a recruitment consultant. I think it's really important to retain control. So you've got your CV, you might have different versions of your CV. You've spoken to some consultants, you've applied for some roles, you've maybe shared it with some people in your network. It's vital to do 2 things. One is know who's got what version of your CV and for what purpose, and also retain control. You don't want anybody to just go AWOL with your CV. AWOL is the wrong expression. You don't want anybody to put your name forward for a role or share your CV for that role unless they've already had a conversation with you. Otherwise, you're not sales and marketing director of your own career. You're just, you know, it's just a bit of an out of control scenario. So all of that means, again, you know, you need to keep good records of what you've applied for, who you've spoken to, who you've followed up with, who's got your CV, and for what purpose. Yep.
Just on that, Andrew, if you don't mind, if I can ask a question. I've seen some folk over the years who would set up a separate email address, you know, specifically for applying for jobs, so they can keep the record that way. Is that something that you've come across, or would it be beneficial, or would it be better just to use your own email address, if you like?
I think that's a lot of personal preference. I think always use a personal email address. Don't use a work email address for obvious reasons. Yeah. One is you may not want your employer to know that you're applying for other roles, but also as soon as you've left that company or organization, you no longer have access to those historical emails, which can be a pain. So it has to be a personal email address. Make sure it looks like a professional email address, you know, fluffy white bunny who likes drinking gin at AOL.com. That wouldn't be a good address. But then, yeah, I think it's not a bad idea to set up a special account just for your job searching, but it just comes down to what you prefer to do. Wenjing,
Okay.
you've got your hand up very patiently.
Yeah, I've been approached by some recruitment agencies recently. And my question is, do you think it's necessary for us to find a recruitment agents for ourselves?
I think if they can find you, that's quite encouraging. That means either you've got a good LinkedIn or web presence, or people are mentioning you in discussion. You know, the recruitment consultant might contact Joe,
Right.
to say, Joe, we're looking for such and such a profile of a person. Do you happen to know anybody? And Joe might say, oh, well, Wenjing, why don't you have a chat with Wenjing? So, you know, that's quite a happy path. But don't necessarily think that just because you've been contacted by 3 recruitment consultancies that they're the 3 that are most suitable for you. There's 22,000 organizations out there. Goodness knows how many consultants they employ. And you know, if a relationship with a recruitment consultant, if a relationship with person A, recruitment consultant, is proving very productive for you, then obviously you persist with it. If on the other hand you're disappointed with person B because they never ever got back to you and they avoid your calls, then forget about them. Yeah, try and find somebody else. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, conscious of time. I mean, I don't mind going on beyond 12, but let's try and have any time beyond 12 as a bit more Q&A. This last one, you know, knocking at a door on that picture. Direct approaches to organization. Yeah, it seems a bit out there, doesn't it? Some people do cold calling. I have in the past. It's a long slog. Some people, you know, strike lucky, but I think you're better to try and use networking first. Certainly research a company or an organization before you ever think about writing to somebody there out of the blue. You know, a networking referral will open the door a bit before you even knock on it. You know, I'm going to contact Brian's parents' plumber, Mark, and the first thing I will say is, I've been, you know, recommended you. Tickle his tummy a little bit. You know, you work for Brian McElroy's parents. You know, that's a much more productive opener than contacting a different plumber who I've got no information about at all. So you're looking to make yourself memorable for the right reasons. You know, if you do directly approach an organization and you do manage to have a conversation with somebody, it may not lead to a job, probably won't, but it might, you know, you must leave a favorable impression. If it doesn't lead to a job, maybe it will lead to, I don't know, some useful information that you can use elsewhere. And, you know, it's just a networking meeting. It's a business meeting. Handle yourself in a professional way. Now I've got a top tip. And you can have a go at this right now if you want, or in your own time. But think of a large organization that you'd like to work for in your geography. And then go into LinkedIn, and in the search bar, type in the name of the organization and the words recruitment manager or talent manager. Don't put in HR manager, because you don't really want to go through HR. What you want is, you know, a recruitment manager or a talent manager is somebody employed by that company, and 100% of their role is looking at the market, looking at people, trying to find people. And if you can find that person and get a dialogue going with them, that can be very, very valuable. You can also refine that search. So, for instance, you could start with Barclays and recruitment manager and then put in Glasgow. And it will show you, I've done this for Barclays, it shows you the recruitment managers who work for Barclays who are based in Glasgow. And you know what? They're on LinkedIn. They've made themselves available. So come up with a contact plan. You know, what do you want to speak to them about? You probably don't want to go, hey, have you got a job? Because that's it's maybe a bit direct, but you know, find a good way of contacting them. Maybe they know somebody that you know, the concentric circles. Maybe have a conversation with the person you know. I think you know that recruitment manager in Barclays. Any chance you could tee up a bit of an introduction, and then off you go. So have a shot at that. If nothing else, it opens you to the little bit of information that these in-house recruitment and talent managers exist, and they are some of your most worthwhile contacts, because that's what they do for a living. Yeah. Okay, so quick summary, positive thinking. Somebody said to me ages ago, effort times quality, or doing the right things and doing enough of it will yield a result. And I think that's very true in recruitment and job finding, rather, job search. But you do need to be organized and structured. Time management's important. Be analytical. Change your approach if something isn't working. I've spoken about 5 routes to market. There are probably some others, but maybe challenge yourself to at least make sure you're having a go at all 5 of these. Practice, research, be the best you can be. Don't waste anybody's time. If you contacted a recruitment manager or a talent manager at Barclays and you know nothing about Barclays and what they do in Glasgow, you just make yourself look a bit silly. Or if you're referred to somebody from a networking conversation, you want to find out more about a particular specialist subject, and you get referred onto that person, be prepared, know something about them, what they do, just be very, very clear about the advice or the information that you're seeking, and enjoy it if you can. I've found a way to enjoy it over the years. Can sometimes be a bit grim, but celebrate the successes. What else have we got here? A few next steps, then I'll throw it over to Q&A. So, just get started. Refine or relaunch your job search. It can be really lonely. So use your network as supportive friends and trusted advisors. Challenge yourself, try and cover all the routes. Be innovative, escape from your comfort zone. If your comfort zone is applying through your screen and doing everything through your laptop screen, well, don't. Carry on doing some of that, but phone some people up. Go to a networking event, go to a meetup group. Try and meet up with a recruitment consultant for a cup of coffee. If people like reading on subjects, probably the most well-known and definitive book is What Color is Your Parachute? It gets published and updated every year, and it's currently in about its 25th yearly edition, I think. It's really good. It covers some of the tools and techniques in an enormous amount of detail. So that takes us, with having gone 1 minute over, to Q&A. I'm happy to stay on as long as people want to chat. If anybody has a 12 o'clock meeting or a 12:05 meeting, then best to scoot off. As I said earlier, though, happy to to take any follow-ups or have individual one-on-one conversations with anybody if you wish.